To be honest, I don't even know if there's really an optimal way to start this one out. I just don't. Like, if this situation had been kept at a simple firing, while I know that there would still be questions surrounding that, at the very least, man, you could take that in stride and have some ideal form of, I guess, not clarity per se to move forward, but a lot of the context, I suppose, wouldn't have been necessary if it was only a firing. However, immediately following that, we have gotten from something that could be considered as happening consistently to something that is quite abnormal in nature. And this entire thing has become incredibly dark, to say the least. Incredibly dark. And I think above all else is we'll go through here and give this situation its fair share of credit and attention, because I'm not talking about anything else in this video. Like, this is... It needs that focus. It deserves that. Because at the end of the day, there are way too many people being affected by this. Of course, more, but a lot of different people outside of that, whether you take relatives into account, whether you take the school into account, or you take this other individual into account, man, there's just way too much going on. And all of the information coming out about it, literally, I'm just looking at it, seeing what's happening before I fully take the time to sit down and look at everything, and it's just progressively getting worse. Like, you are getting pounded with a hammer repeatedly. That's exactly what this felt like. And honestly, as I'm recording this right now, there's probably the potential for more information to come out about this, relating to this, because the situation is far from over. But we need to take it back. I mean, this is a man in Sherrone who, all things considered, has had a solid year this year for the Michigan squad, despite finishing with a loss in the game and ending with a 9-4 record. There's been a lot of growing pains in the organization, given that they started a true freshman at quarterback. But even with that being said, again, successful season, even if it didn't come to full fruition like the other years have. Not to mention, he had, for a couple games this year, been suspended as a part of having to deal with the aftermath of the Connor Stallions situation, with sign stealing and everything like that. But hey, as far as we knew before all of this, he was just going to go ahead, prepare the team for Texas in the Orange Bowl on New Year's Eve, which could actually be a pretty interesting ball game, I would say. That plan would change around drastically as they would fire him. And again, that in and of itself was the initial report from Thamel and Wetzel. And again, if that was just taken at face value, that would have been incredibly shocking for a man who was just elevated to this position. For a man who, as I've heard, and I guess it kind of makes sense when you think about it, is the very first black head coach in Michigan history for football. A prized opportunity for a person or a kind of person who rarely gets represented in that program at that position. And through years of collaborating with Harbaugh and working his way up to that, he accomplished that. Managed to win a championship alongside them before Harbaugh moved on to the NFL. Things seem to be going fine on the outside looking in. But, as this entire thing would show, there was so much going on behind the scenes that changes the entire complexion of the situation and has the ability to change multiple lives all around. As this quote from an ESPN article states, Michigan fired coach Sherrone Moore for cause Wednesday after a university investigation that found credible evidence he was engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a staff member. End quote. I'll get to that point later, because that's going to be important, and that was something that I didn't even know. But generally speaking, we've seen other organizations in other sports and in other, industries even, have to confront these kinds of issues with professionalism time and time again. Like, sometimes you are going to have situations where human nature just takes over completely. That's kind of fair. It does happen. And whether it be, other front office members engaging in these relationships, whether it be players getting themselves in trouble for having these inappropriate relationships, whether it be, for example, I think there was a situation with ABC that was all the rage a few years back with the, supposed backlash regarding a relationship between a pair of journalists or something like that for one of the shows. And I don't even know how that's progressed, but the reaction to that kind of correlates to the sentiment here. You just can't have it. You just can't have it. At that point, we didn't know the full extent of this relationship, but there is a matter of professionalism and just general boundaries that you have to respect as a member of a program. And if you aren't going to do that, the way in which different information about that can be put out now, no matter where your standing is in a given place, they have all the right to move on from you within an instant if they find that it is way too risky for them to engage in any further. Again, you can't necessarily control the idea of attraction in somebody else. But at the very least, when you are in the line of concrete work and dealing with highly sensitive information at times, dealing with very specific things that can affect other people, like in this case again, being a leader of other men, essentially, or for this staff member, potentially trying to, control some form of operation on the campus from a reputational standpoint, from a personal standpoint. How exactly can you be trusted to conduct your job the right way if you are on the job, acting out of turn in any manner with one of your coworkers? Once you cross that line, and as we'll dive deep into later, there is almost no recovering from that. When you initiate that kind of situation, when you breach that territory, You can't pick that back up and just reverse course like nothing happened at all. Because you have now allowed a far greater amount of emotions and other feelings to settle in that could potentially be conflicting to what it is you are trying to conduct in the public eye or amongst the community at this school. And having all this information come out now, they had no choice but to fire him from a reputational standpoint. Let me see if I can find the quote in full. But essentially, as part of a statement, the athletic director for Michigan stated, quote, "This conduct constitutes a clear violation of university policy, and UM maintains zero tolerance for such behavior," end quote. And again, from that standpoint, I think that's fair. Like, you can't promote that whatsoever. What the hell, then, would you be having all of these kids in these classrooms learning about at the end of the day if you are going to encourage said behavior directly like this? It just would not be a good situation to be in at all. And so they had to do what they could in that moment to completely distance themselves. I believe that it was mentioned that an interim president for Michigan also had a statement. Yes. He's fairly new, but as Sporting News stated, Domenico Grasso released a statement to the mass of the university, and it reads as such. Earlier this week, the Department of Intercollegiate Athletics dismissed head football coach Sherrone Moore with cause for violating university policy by engaging in an inappropriate relationship with a staff member. When the findings of a university investigation into Coach Moore's behavior were presented on Wednesday, we immediately terminated his employment. There's absolutely no tolerance for his conduct at the University of Michigan. None. I've been in close communication with the Board of Regents, and we are united in committing to doing what is right. This breach of trust by Coach Moore is painful for many in our community, first and foremost, the individuals directly involved in this situation, yet our swift and decisive action reflects the university's staunch commitment to a campus culture of respect, integrity, and accountability. All of the facts here must be known, so the university's investigation will continue. I encourage anyone with information about this matter to confidentially contact an email related to the university. Our community has worked diligently in recent years to strengthen a safe and respectful environment for all. We must remain steadfast with those efforts. Each of us shares an obligation to uphold our values. If you become aware of any violation of UN policies, I strongly encourage you to report it through the university's compliance hotline. I have tremendous faith in the University of Michigan and the principled work our faculty, staff, and students carry out every day. Together, we will move forward with integrity and excellence and reaffirm our dedication to serving the public good. Sincerely, Domenico Grasso, end quote. Same thing. That standalone line right there. You cannot promote that in any way. You can't even tolerate that. Because that alone, just allowing this to happen behind the scenes and not doing anything about it, not acting on it whatsoever, just sends a message to all these other students and potential employees themselves that, hey, they can go on and do this and potentially get away with it. And you, again, in a firm business like that, where you are actively trying to build up a full generation of new students here to go on and potentially do great things in the years to come in their own respective careers and lives. Ultimately, those things tie back in some way, shape, or form to all three of the core values that they mention here: respect, integrity, and accountability. Simply put, you have to have respect for your craft to keep that in anything personal, separate, and trust me, it is more than likely hard to do that. Even when you are a longer tenured individual in these settings, it's difficult, but you have got to try to put that out there on a consistent basis. And one can also argue that, hey, even if you may be doing what you feel is right for you, that doesn't mean that an institution or organization is going to view that as right in an ethical way, as right in a moral way in some cases, and they can't have that on their roster. Same thing when you look at it from a more personal standpoint, potential familial standpoint. You are not honoring that value even when you know that you have family back home. You go out there and you conduct yourself in that way. What exactly do you believe that the reaction would be from those people when they find out what happened? It would be an absolute disaster. One that could be avoidable if you upheld your integrity in that space. And this was a case where he may have failed to do that. 100%. And accountability. Oh my goodness, the accountability. That'll come later in one of the crazier updates to this thing, which again has just gotten to be completely grim given the content matter. You gotta own it. You gotta acknowledge at some point, sooner rather or later, that if you did conduct yourself in that way, maybe it might not fully represent you, but it was a mistake that you ended up making. And you have to pay the price for it in some way. So initially, this was the form of punishment. But in an even further light, it would get worse immediately. On a ticker, literally just a few minutes later, per the same people in Dan Wetzel and Pete Thamel and other insiders, other articles, Moore was arrested and detained later on Wednesday night and actually spent the night in jail with a mugshot being taken of him and everything. As this quote from the USA Today article states, police in Pittsfield Township, located just south of Ann Arbor, where the University of Michigan is located, said in a statement that it responded to a location at 4:10 p.m. local time on Wednesday for the purposes of investigating an alleged assault. The incident was approximately 30 minutes before the announcement Moore was fired. The Pittsfield Police Department said a suspect in the incident was taken into custody, but did not name the suspect. A CNN article also stated that in response to a request for information about the incident involving Moore, Pittsfield Township Police sent a news release stating that officers had responded to the 3000 block of Ann Arbor Saline Road in Saline, Michigan to investigate an alleged assault. Police confirmed that a suspect was taken into custody and the incident does not appear to be random in nature. At this time, the investigation is ongoing. Given the nature of the allegations, the need to maintain the integrity of the investigation, and its current status at this time, we are prohibited from releasing additional details. The statement from Pittsfield Township Police read, further details regarding the incident will be released as soon as possible, permissible, end quote. The release did not specifically name Sherrone Moore at the time, and granted, that's law. You can't spill all that information out into the public eye. You have to go through every single, method that you would need to in that line of work. Like, it takes way more than just booking the guy. You usually, in that situation, are holding on to them for as much time as you can, and there is a little bit of a window. But ultimately, you detain a person when you are awaiting to charge them with something of some kind, and if you don't have anything within a set time span, you have to release them back into the general public. That's how it goes. So you're not going to be naming names like this. But at the very least, you have to go through the entire process, see what you can actually get on the person, and make it actually make some sense. Because you don't want to just throw darts at a wall, recognize that you don't have anything on this person at all, and then just give out some false charge or some trumped up charge or something like that, because that would corrupt the entire process. But just think back to this quote for a second. Does not appear to be random in nature. I mean, they already said in one of the separate quotes that I read that, okay, this went down, this call went down, and this incident went down just a half hour or so before Sherrone Moore was fired. Or at least that information got released to the public. Chances are he was probably informed, somebody in his circle was probably informed of that beforehand, and maybe, given the nature of that quote, he did not take that lightly at all, whatsoever. And as other information has started to come in about it, it would become very clear, and they would mention as well that this was also tied in to the same staff member being implicated as a potential co-contributor in a way to this entire situation. That same staff member was now in a spot where she might have been in imminent danger at that point. A call was put out, and they got Moore arrested, sent him to jail, detained him for a while, and at that point, you're, again, waiting to see what you can charge him with. There was relatively little information at the time, again, about the full nature of the relationship, about the full nature of the arrest, but the timing couldn't have been any more suspicious. Because just understanding that, okay, the university already had this in mind beforehand, and in some way, shape, or form, they informed Moore about this directly. So who's to say that this entire incident wasn't a direct reaction to that firing that could have potentially ended in a much worse manner? And if that was the mindset that you had going into it, eventually you would be right. But as the USA Today article essentially alluded to, he was booked into Washington County Jail in Michigan at 8:30 p.m. and at around 10:30 that night, he was still in custody at that time with no charges being listed for him. So it'd be a little while before we get access to it. But again, all this stuff is still crazy. Like, you are, again, before this even goes down, actively trying to prepare a ball club to go out there and perform for the final game of the season. Yet you have all this stuff going on behind the scenes that you clearly didn't want out in the spotlight. And now that that's come to be the case, maybe there was a case where, okay, you just could not handle all of that being put out into the fray, which again might also tie into the incident. And you just completely have to, at some point, accept it. You have to. If all these things that are being alleged, tying into the full context here, are true, you can't be surprised at the outcome. And man, when we get to that point, even he was reported to have been there with a sort of solemn look at that point. And at that very moment, you can argue, okay, there is where he recognized that, hey, this was not going to end well at all. At all. Boy, oh boy. Man, there would be just even more craziness here as the days progressed. We'd just be still trying to process what the fuck was happening on the day following that. Immediately, as you have all the shows in sports, even some outside of that realm, just talking about the situation. It was too big of a story to not cover. We're talking about, again, a man representing one of the bigger programs in the nation, representing one of the bigger universities in the nation, seemingly on a solid track, and all of a sudden, although not, again, out of randomness per se, putting himself in this situation where he's now cast out and completely relieved of his duties. It was just bad. And then the initial details started to trickle in a way. And boy, it would be rough. Pretty much, the relationship with this staff member would be kind of outlined just a little bit, just a tad bit. And as this article, or part of this article, mentions here from Michigan Live, I guess one of the news outlets there themselves, essentially, quote, Moore had been involved in an intimate relationship for a number of years, end quote, with this staff member. And that the staff member allegedly broke up with Moore earlier in the week and presented herself to UM authorities, spurring his termination. And now it put things into even more context, taking that quote specifically in progressing through this situation. Also, keep in mind too, it would probably have made sense to tie this in a little later on. But it's also worth mentioning right now that, as AP states, Moore, who was married with 3 young daughters, did not return a message from the Associated Press seeking comment. And he met his wife, as I read from another article, in 2015, or something like that, when he was, married her in 2015, I should say. Met her when he was still at Central Michigan, and the relationship took off from there. His daughters are also incredibly young, mind you. And I'll reiterate this throughout the entire thing. Nobody's a true... There's no way that you can have a positive outlook on this if you're anybody. There's just no way. We're not necessarily talking about winning and losing here. But everybody in some way, shape, or form is touched by this. And it hits home completely for none other than all 4 of those people, between his wife and his daughters. Can you imagine having to still take all this in, even today, knowing that with you still being in close proximity, I would assume, because you probably moved your family over to be as close as possible to the job, the man is coming home more often than not on a consistent basis, being in your presence, I can't attest to what he's been doing the whole time in his own residence. That's not my business. But presenting himself as a husband and a father. And aside from that, you have this relationship with a completely different person taking place concurrently for years? Years. Think about what I said earlier about how over that time you're breaking all these boundaries and you are crossing these lines. And in that moment of time, in those moments of time, you are developing greater emotions, greater feelings, greater sentiments, maybe connections in a way with these people. And we see that stuff like that can happen in much quicker time. We are talking about years with this particular staff member being in this situation. And likely trying as hard as possible to keep it under wraps for the longest time. Not necessarily saying much about it. Again, I can't speak on how that relationship ended up going. But clearly, if there is an allegation that there was a will on her end to break up, some kind of rift happened at some point of time. And as that came through, as the allegation goes, she decided finally to speak up about it, to break the terms of the relationship, and to seemingly move on. Put it past her, put it behind her, and try to turn over a new leaf. While that could be seen as simple for some people, it's not going to be that way for everybody. Especially when you truly do not know what is going on with a person underneath the surface. And when you think about the actual situation in question, the incident that got Sherrone Moore arrested after this, he, again, did not take this well whatsoever. But first, it is worth mentioning what would happen next. Because we get yesterday. I'm taking a nap, bro. I'm taking a fucking nap yesterday. And I wake up, I see something on Fox Sports initially, a headline, talking about what? And then this shit started completely turning left field. Now, as this quote from another Wetzel and Thamel article on ESPN stated, former Michigan football coach Sherrone Moore faces 3 criminal charges as his arraignment Friday revealed details of his actions that led him to being arrested in jail hours after he was fired Wednesday. Prosecutors charged Moore with felony third-degree home invasion and 2 misdemeanors, stalking in a domestic relationship, and breaking and entering. Moore was released from jail after meeting the $25,000 bond. And the arraignment and charges offered a window into Moore's actions after he was fired for cause due to an inappropriate relationship with a staff member. End quote. Now, it is worth mentioning as well that as the Los Angeles Times article states, the home invasion is a third-degree felony. It's punishable by up to 5 years in prison and a $2,000 fine. And the other 2 counts amount to somewhere in between a year in jail and like a 90-day sentence or something like that. So those might be relatively tame. But even then, taking everything into account that you've heard now, immediately my reaction was, nigga, home invasion, stalking, and breaking and entering. So now we get even more of a glimpse into what could have went down with that alone. Before we even get into that, okay? But look, breaking and entering. So, as this was going down, as you get the information, you get word on this. I suppose that in his mind, he had an understanding at that point. No matter what the hell his emotion might have been, no matter where his mental state might have been at, he had an idea that, okay, this woman right here, she ruined me. She made me lose my job. Despite, of course, if these actions are true, committing to them yourself. Because, again, accountability, right? You have your role to play in that, as well as another person, and other parts of the entire situation. So he again, even if, and again, we'll get into that sentiment, because you do also have to, I'm not going to say feel sorry, I'm not going to say give him grace, but at least have an understanding of what he might be dealing with. I think that's reasonable. Still, he's not blameless at all. Like, he owns his responsibility in here and should take accountability for that. But again, from his perspective at the time, it's like, okay, I'm ruined now. I have nothing left to turn back to. And she, the staff member, is the cause of it. So I'm going to do whatever it is that I see fit to try to reverse course here, to try to make her feel the same kind of pain that I did. As for home invasion, again, intrusion of property completely. I am 100% sure that this person was not expecting more to just walk in there like this. Potentially feeling a number of different ways at the moment, and potentially willing to do something unpredictable to send a message in some direct fashion. But again, even if it came after him being fired, it's parlayed by a amount of different layered emotions building up in this relationship over time. Along with what Sherrone Moore might have been dealing with. And then stalking. Stalking, in this case, could suggest in one way that even if the allegation is that this staff member broke up, allegedly, with Moore on Monday and terminated the entire thing, that would suggest to me that they had not been in contact for quite some time. In some way, shape, or form, even if it's an allegation, one could surmise in that case that Moore was trying to keep tabs on this person in a very, very creepy manner. I don't think there's any way of getting around that. Like, no, you aren't... Who knows what his intent might have been at the time. But at the very least, you're trying to keep yourself in the know about what is happening with this person at a moment's notice. Potentially delving into some very personal territory that you probably don't need to be getting yourself into. But again, going out of your way to do it while you actively have your own duties to handle and own responsibilities to handle as a man on the job and as a man of the household. Just keeping it a buck there. It's madness, man. Think back to my point, though, on the breaking and entering component of it. something potentially unpredictable was going to go down, and Moore was going to make sure in that situation that this person felt as much pain and hurt that he could have felt after hearing the news. And it would get drastic very fast. And this is the moment. This is the moment right here that I knew personally. Did I say it? Okay, this shit got fucking dark. This shit got incredibly dark. All of this comes from Katie Rezmersky, the first assistant prosecutor on this case. And essentially, I cannot directly tell you what he attempted to do, because you can't even say the word on YouTube. But essentially, self-harm in front of this person. As I read from other articles, he armed himself. And as this quote states, he barged his way into the woman's apartment while she was home, grabbed butter knives and scissors, and threatened to take his life in front of her. Rezmersky said Moore told the woman, "My blood is on your hands," quote, "and you ruined my life," quote, as a part of a series of very, very threatening, intimidating, terrifying, quite frankly, statements and behaviors, end quote. I'm like, whoa, hold up, time out. What the fuck? We just turn this up to the absolute max, because there is no way. And again, it all ties back to what had been detailed in the other Michigan article and in other, I guess, quotes from this same Rezmersky person. But we were initially supposed to believe, right, that this was just your run-of-the-mill affair. No, not a chance. Not a chance in hell. If it built up over years like this, and in a reaction to it potentially ending, you are willing to take it to that level just to get some form of vengeance on this other person, by willingly putting yourself in self-inflicted harm's way to prove this point. Like, I've genuinely, and I don't want to play the recency bias game. I don't want to do that. I don't even need to put it into this situation. There have been much, much darker things to go on in the NCAA over the years. This is definitely one of the darker ones that I've laid witness to. Truly. And if all these quotes are true, like, oh my gosh, you can get a sense from there that something was just completely off. Even though I said that, okay, him being in the court with a sullen and solemn look could be the moment where he recognized that he fucked up tremendously. My blood is on your hands. You ruined my life. Again. Like I said. Literally moving through this as a potential victim. And again, potentially feeling a number of different emotions at the time. You can't completely dismiss that And that'll be important in a second. You can't dismiss that. But, like, damn. As far as we know, this was a consenting relationship, even if it might have been inappropriate. So again, the roles to play in this thing were pretty evened out. But by that point, Moore might have been in a state where he was feeling as though he had lost it all and wanted to do whatever he could to see that feeling play out in somebody else's eyes. And this is where I think I need to make something very clear as well. Because part of this quote also states from that same ESPN article that I referenced, for yourself. I can't say that. I can't say that on YouTube. I can't say that. Clear as day. I'm going to do that and I'm going to make you watch. That I felt. To feel the pain that I feel at the moment. Like, oh my gosh. I mean, like, whoa. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Whoa, bro. So again, you, as a potential family man here, think about the wife. Think about the wife. I have not even been in a relationship in my life. And what the hell do you do before situations like that? You take vows in front of that person, face to face, in a marriage, running through all these things, and talking about how the main thing, above all else, is to be there for one another. And I'm sure that in his own space, he's made countless allusions to the notion of putting his life on the line for her if necessary, to protect her, to nurture her, to care for her, I would surmise. And you are willing to go out there, and again, you can't make fun of that struggle per se at all. Because it is really important to know that, to recognize what might be going on with Sherrone Moore right now. But you are willing, in this situation, reading that, to do that to another person and potentially put your life on the line at the detriment of your wife and your children. That would have had an even worse effect right now. I can't attest to the personal dynamic there, because, after hearing all this, it is going to take a lot of work for that relationship to repair in and of itself. And I don't really know. I can't say right now whether they'd be able to move past something like this. This is difficult to move past from. Same with the children. They may not fully understand this, and they have to hear about this in some way, shape, or form from their mother right now. But what is the sentiment going to be when they grow older? They're all under 10 years old, from what I understand. So they have to go through this, and they may be in a situation in schooling where other kids are talking about this, potentially in negative ways, I would assume, at times, and they genuinely don't know how the hell to respond. They don't know how to operate around that. They're not at that level yet. But as they begin to understand the full details of it, as they get older and older, this is something that could potentially shake them up for life. And again, if he would have actually made a potential fatal move, all because of that relationship to the side that you probably had no business being in the first place, there could have been a real possibility that these children would have been without their father. And that would have been the ultimate sad point here. So, and again, a situation where nobody really comes out of this in a positive way. Everybody's coming out of this unscathed. They are obviously the most affected. It hits them the hardest. And it could have been a whole lot worse for them. I don't know if their relationships with him, from a familial standpoint, would ever be the same. But if they are, if they happen to repair in some way, if this can be salvaged, at the very least they can say that he is actually still here and able to potentially work this out. Because that would truly be a sour note of time. Truly. Like, I could not imagine that happening. It's horrible, man. Now, we gotta get into even more territory about this, because in reality, well, let's just say that in terms of the nature of Sherrone Moore, apparently this isn't something that has been a secret amongst those in the university. As this CBS Sports article states about it, while the situation surrounding Moore's final relationship with a staff member and subsequent firing was a surprise to the public, it was the worst kept secret in Michigan, CBS Sports reported Thursday. One high-level Michigan booster told CBS Sports that everybody in the program has known this the last 2 seasons, and that Schembechler Hall was swarming with lawyers earlier this month, end quote. Now again, same thing. You know, they were working, I guess, in that sense, to eradicate this problem, because one of my questions, and one of the questions of a ton of people were, okay, did they have knowledge of this beforehand and just waited all this time to make this decision now? Technically, yes, but for the right reason. You don't want to be in a situation where you fire a person in the college football landscape for cause without having every single piece of evidence needed to suggest that you can do so and not be, I guess, penalized for it in a way, or not have any backlash come out about it. If this is an investigation that had been building with time, it would be natural to wait for the culmination of all the right evidence to make the decision then and there without a shred of regret whatsoever. Not to mention, as I've read in other articles, it is detailed to me that Sherrone Moore had been struggling with mental health for quite a time and had been acting in a strange manner per other people at the university, officials, members, things like that, before his firing, the weeks leading up to it. Again, maybe they were informed about it. Maybe he was also understanding, if this investigation was going on, that, okay, he's probably being looked at a little bit. And so you're definitely going to be walking on eggshells, it seems like. But still, mental health is a serious issue. I've already stated that relating to the Marshawn Kneeland case. I like it is genuinely not something that you can always pinpoint. Yes, there are guidelines on the signs to look for, the ways that you can rally people around potentially overcoming their situations, their plights. There are ways to do that, but the effects that it can have on people, sometimes you cannot predict. You can't predict. Like, everybody, even if they are dealing with mental health issues, is not going to be in the same exact bracket or state or condition. People react to it differently. And while this is definitely one of the more extreme cases, that just adds to how distinct of a situation this truly is involving Sherrone Moore. You really have to hope that this can, in time, get better for the man. Because that is genuinely a real struggle. And I've seen people call him, admittedly, it's not the smartest situation in the world, but to flat out call him dumb, to act like this is something that a ton of other former NFL players themselves hadn't been dealing with at times, to act as though this is something that almost always happens, is just not doing the situation justice. I mean, ironically enough, while Hoosh Manzana, might have said this on the show, wasn't it Emmanuel Acho doing similar stuff at Fox Sports? I don't know whether or not he's married, but risking your career, putting your entire reputation on the line for that. Or having other people talk about it. I didn't watch this, but Shannon Sharpe as well could also attest to doing a similar thing. Putting his reputation on the line for all of the shit that broke out earlier with what it was that he was reported to have done over the past couple years. Not necessarily a shot there, but you can't approach this situation and try to call him out for any and everything while acting as if you can't possibly fathom what it is that he's dealing with, while acting as if you can't possibly understand what he might be going through. It's not right to approach it that way. And again, I've definitely said at this point, Sherrone Moore is not blameless. But this is clearly a man as well who is dealing with quite a lot on top of that. And that can inevitably overwhelm an individual. So again, I'm not going to say, okay, give him full grace. But you got to at least have respect for the situation. And also, I've just been seeing stuff as well, because that just reads as ignorant when you have different people in these conversations, in these posts. Like, I saw something, they have the post out for his mugshot. I see people talking about Go Bucks, putting fucking Brutus on the logo. Like, let me make this very clear too. Because, yes, we could play around with that. We could play around with that. But at the same time, when you are dealing with something like this, that correlates to real life implications, and potentially, if it would have been self-inflicted, a near-death experience, that would have been brought upon by himself. At the end of the day, the game, no matter how much of a rivalry game it is, no matter how much deep-seated hatred those fan bases might have towards each other, at the end of the day, it is just a game. And you can't try to tie in commentary around that while messing with information like this. Like, it's already affected those players so much. Not only do these players still have to, under now interim head coach Biff Poggi, have to go out and try to shake back from this, they also have to hear their own respective, or talk about this in a way to the media in some fashion. They've got to deal with all of the backlash of this just as much as anybody else, making them also be individuals who do not find any positive outlook from this situation at all. Again, as I've stated with some of the other stuff, you build connections with these players, and now you have more being ousted from this position, preaching to you all this different stuff about leadership on and off the field, potentially. That was the message in the locker room. And you find out that he gets fired for a cause by doing the very things, in some fashions, that he was advising you against himself, while actively trying to encourage you to get the best you could out of your football career. That's going to be crushing to a player. And then Poggi as well, I'm not really sure, but you have to answer the call as well. You have to find a way to rally these men around this. I think Poggi's a little older, so maybe he can handle it from a mature standpoint, but I don't know. And it's like, as well, a couple of players have actually been lost as a result of this. They mentioned that a 4-star tight end from Montana decommitted after hearing of his firing, and a 3-star offensive lineman, Bear McWhorter, also decommitted. Like, they were literally talking about him putting on the cap and everything. And then, just a few minutes later, having to deal with a wave of different people, I guess, pointing him to what just happened at the program, thus forcing him to change his commitment and, I guess, send back his national letter of intent. So the impact there is already being felt in multiple ways as well. But before reaching that point, it's worth understanding that in terms of firing people for cause, this is very far from the first time that this has happened. And again, even when you look at some of these other cases, they are all very, very different. We gotta go all the way back to bitch-ass Bobby Petrino, who was fired with cause after that scandal with this woman who worked for him at the time, that he had a relationship with when he was at Arkansas, and he was being untruthful to his bosses at that time. I already referenced that when it was mentioned that he was rehired as an interim this year for the program. And thank goodness they understood as well with hiring Silverfield that his ass was just going to be a coward and leave anyways and do whatever it is he wanted to do to work against the betterment of the program. That's how Petrino is. But that case was in 2012, and you have other situations here, like, for example, as this entire article gets through, Jim McElwain, the former Florida head coach, was fired for cause in 2017, as he claimed that he and his family received death threats at the time. Now, there was an investigation here, as they state, and that found that no such threats had been made. But McElwain, I do remember him for legitimately not being that great of a head coach at that program. I do remember that tremendously. And you do have to take those kinds of threats seriously. But you can't lie. You can't lie about that. And try to play on these sensitivities that other people have in this situation just to try to progress forward. Like, that's not right at all. Or in 2021, which I was not familiar with at all, when Washington State fired their head coach Nick Rolovich for cause after he refused to comply with Washington State's COVID-19 vaccine mandate. Definitely a special circumstance situation, but you know that at that point, even if he might not have necessarily had it, as a person actively on the job, actively moving around from city to city to coach the football team, it would be imperative for you to have that in, probably, from my perspective, because you don't want to get in a situation where you just spread that elsewhere, at the time especially, unknowingly, and then just continue to have other cases sparking back up. That also puts your players at risk as well. If you do, get this, or deny the mandate, get the, contract it, I should say. Yeah. Contract it. And then pass it on to other players at that time, potentially putting their seasons and their own lives in danger. So you can see why, if you're going to be that stubborn. Like, you know what the hell you're representing here. And I guess Washington State saw it as such. Then in 2023, I already mentioned Mel Tucker's ass. Talking about having phone... You know what? Yeah. See that quote? I told you already about this shit. I told you. What the fuck do you have going on to where you even consider doing some shit like this? So you had to go. You had to fucking go, bro. You had to go. It's as simple as that. Like, what the fuck are we doing? Okay? So it's definitely far from the first time that this has happened in college football, and you can probably look back a whole hell of a lot further as well. But incidents that fall in line with professional boundaries being broken is not something that has been new to Michigan. And in fact, over the past 5 years, they've had a couple of other incidents take place with people and higher authorities getting themselves in these exact same situations. Maybe without less of an extreme reaction to the overall course of the matter, but just hear out this entire thing from this USA Today article. Because on top of the other scandals you want to talk about when it comes to the sign stealing stuff and things like that, yeah, this is truly a problem. Quote, the University of Michigan has been down this road before. In 2020, it was the university provost. In 2022, it was the university president. In 2025, it's the head football coach. All three were accused of inappropriate behavior involving other people at the university, and now the university is using a law firm to investigate football coach Sherrone Moore, the same law firm that it helped it investigate University President Mark Schlissel just a few years earlier. The university didn't say which policy Moore allegedly violated, but it appears to be policy number 20197, which was implemented in response to the sexual harassment scandal involving former provost Martin Filbert, the second highest administrator at the school. The policy prohibits most supervisor-employee relationships and was put in place in 2021, shortly before Schlissel was fired in early 2022. Nearly 4 years later, Michigan is back at it with more. End quote. And that was per Brent Schrodenboer, as one of the contributors here. So, my thing is this. Now, they are taking a step in the right direction, and I mean, that is how you move forward, by completely stressing and re-stressing that specific policy there that has now been implemented over time. From that standpoint, you have to give them their credit. It's already a rule that they are more than willing to implement, and by having all three of these people removed in the past half decade, you're lining up with that. You understand that this isn't something that you are trying to give light, respect, and merit to, and you want it out of your system. So you're doing the right thing by eradicating it out of the fucking building. But at that point, you also have to think, why the fuck does this keep happening in this half decade? Why is this continuing? Like, are we genuinely hiring the right people at that point? If you have 3 different people at 3 different positions, all violating essentially the same code of conduct, repeatedly and in different ways, under the same umbrella, clearly that is something that fundamentally has to change as well. And they just need to consider that when they make their next hire for head coach, and honestly, at this point, given that, anywhere. Because it's like, damn, like, you can enforce it for sure, but wouldn't it be a lot easier to just hire people who legitimately have the good character needed to simply just not, for the love of goodness, not engage in a supervisor-employee relationship? It's not that hard. It can't be that hard. It can't be that hard, bro. Like I said, yes, human nature takes over. Fair. You can't crap on anybody for that. But at the same time, bro, this keeps happening in your program, you're gonna get the questions. You're inevitably going to catch some flack here, because it's continuing to happen on your watch, and it simply needs to be put to a fucking stop. It's as simple as that. Like, it cannot happen that way, bro. But eventually, one has to ask himself, when putting all of this into context, how exactly does one move forward from this? Well, we have part of an answer as to what the next step is. Quote from the CBS Sports article states, ultimately, the judge agreed to a $25,000 cash surety bond, continuation of mental health treatment, and a GPS tether for more, making it clear that any contact with the alleged victim would be a violation of the terms of his bail. The defense agreed to waive the 14-day requirement for a probable cause conference, saying that calendars have been coordinated for January 22nd, with the judge setting the date as such. End quote. So, probable cause. I don't really know, okay? But because probable cause in that situation, it's not necessarily like self-defense from my purview, but essentially probable cause is trying to funnel through a number of different reasons, maybe, that fall outside of an individual person's control, that leads to them committing said crime. So in this case, you are looking at probable cause for all 3 charges, I would assume. And I'm not gonna lie, we won't know a given answer until January 22nd. And that's if it stands. But if the date's set right now, okay, we can go with that. We are looking at probable cause in this situation for home invasion, stalking, and breaking and entering. And even when you think of mental health being considered in this, I find it very difficult at the moment to understand how you can come up with probable cause for a person invading someone else's property, stalking on somebody for months on end and breaking and entering into someone's household unprompted. If they can find something, it'd help, but I don't see that right now. That's just my perspective. Personally. And above all else, as I've said, in terms of moving forward, it's going to be difficult for everybody. You genuinely were trying to build some form of success with Moore as a head coach, and clearly that cannot last. This victim, alleged victim, still is going to have to live with that situation forever. Because even if he did not go through with that action, you can believe for damn sure that there is going to be some form of trauma associated with having him even allude to the idea of self-harm in front of her, in her own house. Just think about that. Like, again, consensual relationship, and again, Moore bears culpability. This alleged victim bears culpability in the entire flow of a relationship that lasted for years on years on years. Okay? Regardless of that, in the solace of her own home, she now has to relive through that image every single day. Every single day. And no amount of compensation can eviscerate that, nullify that feeling from her mind. It can't. No matter what the outcome of the situation is, the family as well is still going to have to do as much as they can to repair. And they have a number of massive decisions coming up for them to be making. Like, these are situations where everything is a test of sorts. The team will definitely be tested. You can bank that shit. And the wills of each and every one of these individuals will be tested, especially when it comes to that family. I go back to the vows, and again, you are coming face to face with a person who you spent a few years beforehand cultivating the relationship into elevating it into the next level. Affirming them in that moment. And now you have to ask yourself if they still hold strong enough in this moment to overcome something like that. And that is a tall task for pretty much anybody who would have to deal with the situation. Also, again, the impact of the children, as I've already stated. And the players, as I've already stated. But ultimately, this all does fall back on Sherrone Moore. A man who, if all these allegations are true, definitely went out of his own way to place himself in a situation that could have proven to be a detriment to pretty much every single person around him. And it got so overwhelming to where he almost decided to completely remove himself from the living equation. Because of all these things done behind the scenes, coming back in one way or another to work against him in real time. Taking things to an even greater extreme when it comes to faith and religion in that sense. Even when accounting for that, you would hope in some way, shape, or form that this is a lesson learned, that this is a man who, despite going through all this turmoil right now, can find a way to ultimately overcome these struggles, get back in a good direction in his life, first and foremost, and then ultimately see what he can do when potentially entering the college football landscape again. It is not going to happen anytime soon. It's not going to. Nobody is going to want to touch that right now. Best believe. But for his sake, he's got other things in his life right now, between this potential case, between trying to make things right if they are reconcilable with his family, to game plan for. That'll do it for this one. And I'm not even about to go ahead and say what I would usually say in this situation, because it would be absolutely remiss of me to think that somebody would get joy or happiness out of hearing a situation like this. This is not something that should bring a person bliss to talk about, to deal with, to experience in real time. It shouldn't. And again, as I've already said, approaching it in that way does not give the situation the entire respect that it deserves. Would be totally unfair on my front to say that, and disingenuous. So that's not going to happen here. But I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace. And we will continue. It's probably going to be a little while before that case takes place. Of course, they mentioned January 22nd. Just gonna try as much as possible to stay up to date with that, because it is highly, highly important.